What's going on, everyone? Tayler Kyles and Mike Kadlick here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another episode of Pat's Daily, brought to you by our good friends at Prize Picks and Game Time. We are continuing the depth projection series that Mike has been doing on the CLNS website. Done a great job. We already have defensive line in the books. We did a video. Mike wrote it down. And the most recent part of the series, Mike, you dove into the offensive line. So we're going to discuss it now. You're going to give your takes. I'll throw in my 2 cents because I cannot keep my damn mouth shut. And we're going to have a good time. Going from the deepest position group on the team to probably, that, and I think actually maybe wide receiver, probably neck and neck a little bit. But offensive line, I think if you had to differentiate, is probably at the bottom. So before we get into all the good stuff, trade candidates, sleepers, surprise cuts, let me know what you think about this group overall.
Yeah, like you said, and you sugarcoated it better than I can. This is their worst position group. Like it stinks, and it's tough to say. There's a better way to say it. Like you said, they're at the bottom. I guess that's the nice way to say it. But yeah, I mean, tough position again for like the third year in a row. Last year, obviously wasn't great. They started 11 offensive line combinations through 17 games, and so that was clearly should have been on the top of the bill as sort of their rebuild, right? They had the opportunities in the offseason to go after big names, your Jonah Williams, your Tyron Smiths, guys like that. But they sort of went a different route. And, they picked up 3 guys in free agency, Nick Red, a guard, who was the other? Michael Jordan, a guard, and then Chuks Okorafor, obviously at tackle, a career-ish right tackle who they're going to try and move to the left side. And then in the draft process, they take Hayden Wallace, they take Layden Robinson. And it seems like, just like they have the last couple of years, they're just going to kind of try and piece it together, throw a couple things. That was funny, together. Throw a couple things at the wall and see what sticks. So I guess we're going to have to wait and see again. That's kind of where I am right now. We saw a couple different combinations in the spring. Obviously, Cole Strange is injured. Using Caden Wallace at tackle, at guard, at left, and right. Mike Onwenu, who you signed this offseason to an extension. He starts at right tackle, then he moves into guard again. So again, it's a room where there's a lot of mysteries. There's a lot of what ifs. There's not really a true. Well, I guess the true leader in the room is David Andrews, a center who's 31 and is going into his 10th NFL season. So it's a big maybe, it's a big what if, but I'm not sold on it. And I'm going to have to see it play out on the field before I can really say that this room has frankly improved it all from last season.
So I'll give my take on the sunny side of the street, but first acknowledging that everything you said is valid. There's so many question marks in this group, and that's why I think there's been a lot of pessimism, which is also fair. This room has had a different position coach every season since 2022, which is pretty wild when you think about it. 2021, you had Carmen Brasillo for a couple years as co-offensive line coach. He leaves, and the whole mass exodus to Las Vegas with Josh McDaniels. Then you go to Matt Patricia, who was underqualified and way overstretched because he was also the offensive coordinator. Then last year you have Adrian Clem, who didn't really fit with the coaching staff, we found out after the season, and obviously had to leave due to health reasons, and then everything really unraveled. I do think the positive that you look at more than anything is Scott Peters. Now, I interviewed Brandon Thorne a few months ago. I'm actually going to interview him again tomorrow. That episode's going to drop. And he did say that Patriots fans should be excited about Scott Peters because, one, he worked with one of the brightest offensive mind coaches in the history of the game in Bill Callahan. Now he's working under his son in Tennessee. And no, he's never had his own room before, but he played the position. He's got a jiu-jitsu background, which he mixes into a lot of his teachings. He also teaches offensive linemen as kind of like a side hustle, and he's really big on hand usage and getting your heads out of the blocks and things like that. So fundamentally, we've even heard from players, the way he teaches is very different and more hands-on than what they've gotten in the past. I asked Scott Peters about that. He said he never wants to be in a position where he's asking guys to do something that he hasn't explained, and he's never going to get on them for something that he hasn't told them to do before. And that kind of vision, the fact that he's worked with Alex Van Pelt, that Browns offensive line that was fantastic in terms of their chemistry with all those rotating pieces, gives you some promise and some hope that he can maximize the guys he has at his disposal. But, that said, Chuks Okorafor played left tackle in college. Now he's moving from the right where he was his entire NFL career. So you do have to worry how that's going to work. Left guard, I actually like City So there. That was his position in college. You hope he takes a step forward. David Andrews, like you said, Mike Onwenu. We'll see throughout the season if he does stick at right guard like we saw at the end of minicamp. I actually think that's great think he's a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber guard. I think he's just a solid offensive tackle. And Caden Wallace, you know, this is a guy you took in the 3rd round. If you can get him reps and he can get used to NFL competition at a position where he's a little more comfortable, I really think that this is a line that at the very least could be a strong run-blocking unit, especially in the middle. And then in terms of pass protection, because everything in that Browns offense really stacked on top of the run game, I think it could maybe take some of the weight off this line in terms of, you know, having to be in situations where pass rushers have their ears pinned back and they're just firing downhill. So again, a lot of negativity around this line, and I understand, but I just wanted to say I do think there are reasons for optimism. But
I think that's a good way to look at it. Like, everything we said right there is pretty much correct. And there is one way to look at it, but there is an optimistic side where, you know, if things all fall into place, again, Scott Peters, if he sort of can elevate the room, then there are reasons to be optimistic. So again, it's definitely a wait and see. There's no definites in the room, but I think that's sort of, you know, the two lenses you can look at it.
100%. But just, 100%.
Yeah.
All right. So first, let's get into sleepers. Who do you got? Who is not getting enough attention from the public?
All right. I'm going to go with Antonio Mafi, the 2nd-year guard out of UCLA. And it's kind of this one's kind of an interesting one. You kind of, in doing this last year and, you know, starting up the article series again this year, sometimes you have to, you know, pull stuff out that might not really make a ton of sense, but just hear me out on this, because Mafi was, you know, he started 5 games last year. I think he was active in all 17, and he wasn't great. He allowed 5 sacks, 7 penalties. He had a 32.3 overall grade according to PFF. He wasn't good.
The worst guard, wasn't he? Like, by
I think so. Yeah. So like it wasn't great. So new system, new coach, new head coach, all that kind of stuff brought in. He could easily be a cut candidate. Somebody who, look, this wasn't our pick last year. He comes in this year, he doesn't play well, and see you later. Sorry. But I think they want to work with him. I think they want him to be on this team. And that showed out all spring because he played a ton of center. He was essentially the backup for the most part behind David Andrews. Nick Leverett worked in there a little bit as well, kind of towards the end of, you know, the weeks and what we saw. But there was a ton of Antonio Mafi at center. And from what I saw, now granted, caveat, no pads, but he looked comfortable. He looked okay. I don't know if he played a ton of center in college, but he looks like he kind of understands. He looks like he understood what he's doing out there. So I think they're going to try and have him sort of be that backup center to David Andrews. Andrews, like I mentioned before, 31, heading into his 10th season. On the older side, if Mafi can be a serviceable backup, play well when he's called on, maybe they kind of want to turn Mafi into that center of the future. Obviously, that's a tall task because he wasn't good last year. But I just think that so many people can so easily say, Mafi stunk last year, new regime, see you later. I think from what we've seen, they're really going to try and cement a role with him as a center heading into this season.
And to your point, we didn't notice any high snaps. Like, he was getting a lot of these reps. When you were talking about it, I was thinking about it, I was like, actually, I don't think there's been a single time where we were like, whoa, these snaps are out of control.
Right.
It was never really noticeable, so you got to give him credit there. And I will also say that the biggest problem I saw last season was his hands. For some reason, he didn't use his fingers. Like, there were so many times where he's engaging, and he's like this. I'm like, dude, you're strong as hell. Yeah. If you can really lock on to guys, that's where I think his career is going to be, kind of like a Mike Nwenu, where no, you're not the best lateral mover, but if you can really lock guys down, they're not going anywhere once they're within your grasp. And again, that's where Scott Peters puts a lot of emphasis in his teaching. So hopefully he can get the best out of Antonio Mafi. For this category, I'm going with Nick Leverett. I actually think he is going to be the top backup interior lineman, and in emergency situations, he can also kick outside. Because with the Buccaneers, he actually played a lot of snaps for them back in 2022 when Tom Brady was still there. And there was a game, I think in their last game against the Rams in the playoffs, they had some injury at tackle, and he spent an entire series at right tackle and actually didn't, or right or left tackle, one or the other, but actually didn't look that bad. More than that, we were at minicamp practices, I think the last day, they kind of let guys have fun. They had offensive linemen out there running routes, catching passes, and it's all fun and games. You're not expecting anything from these guys. You know, they're just having some fun. But, like, Nick Leverett was actually looking pretty smooth out there, made a one-handed catch where I was like, whoa, wait a minute. That's like, I've never seen
this guy's an athlete, right? He can kind of do something.
He clearly just moves. And I think Chuks Okorafor is probably the best athlete of that group. Like, he's slim. He looks like a big tight end more than the other guys who look like offensive linemen. Not the 2-7. That's not my point. But Nick Leverett, the way he moves is interesting. And in this Alex Van Pelt scheme, they love using 6-0 line, sometimes 7-0 line packages, where Nick Harris for the Browns was used as a fullback. He was used at times as an extra tight end. They got a lot of use out of him. I think that's going to be Nick Leverett's role if he doesn't start. Like early on in OTAs, we did see him really at that right guard spot when Onwenu was at right tackle, which I was like, that's fine if you start out that way. You hope that one of the young guys can come and push him back to the backups where he belongs, because that's where he spent his career. But I really do like the athleticism he brings, the experience. He was solid in that Buccaneers offense, really wasn't like a clear liability. A mauler a bit in the run game too. Look on my Twitter and look up Nick Leverett. He loves him some pancakes. He's a violent dude out there. So the energy he brings, the athleticism, the versatility, I think at least he's going to be, again, in those 6-0 line packages. And then if somebody does go down, I think he's the top backup center and the top backup guard. So, I got him as someone that maybe we're not talking about quite enough.
Yeah, I think kind of mixing in the Mafi thought into that. Like and we're going to get to it in the surprise cuts. Like they need a ton of help at tackle. Like they're not very deep there. So you don't know what's going to really happen there as far as if you keep 10, if you keep 9, whatever, who has to stay. If Nick Leverett can cement himself as the top interior line backup at center as well, that makes Mafi expendable, like we just mentioned. So, like, if you can just use that guy, rely on him at all 3 spots, then you're fine. And he showed that. He was sort of, him and Mafi were taking those backup center reps, and he was obviously first in line at guard when it started. And then when the rotation happened, he was working in there as the backup. So I'm with you. I think Leverett can sort of turn into that swing, that rotational interior offensive lineman.
And if I remember correctly, I think Mafi was a guard and Leverett was a center for the backups in the last day of minicamp, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So, we're going to talk a little bit more about Mafi very soon. But first, quick word from our friends at Prize Picks. Be right back.
You can win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. With the NBA Finals over, the hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball is just heating up, with stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves, alongside greats like Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You can earn up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. Prize Picks is available in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. I made my first $10 deposit and received an instant $10 bonus. If you have the skills, you can play for a shot at turning your $10 into $1,000. I've got Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 3-points made and Breanna Stewart for more than 23 points. For baseball, I've got Kyle Schwarber for more than 9 hitter fantasy score and Bryce Miller for more than 4 pitcher strikeouts. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, now let's talk about some surprise cuts. I feel like this is a position group where surprise cuts are kind of hard to find because they barely have their starting unit, as we talked about. They have like a couple good depth pieces, but who do you think is someone who might be off the roster that maybe fans wouldn't quite expect?
Yeah, so like I mentioned in the last segment here, like they need depth at tackle. Like right now it's Okorafor, Calvin Anderson, Mike Onwenu, and Vidarian Lowe are the only 4 players on this roster that have played meaningful snaps at tackle in the NFL. So what do you do there, right? Like, do you keep all 4? Lowe hasn't been great. Anderson hasn't really been great. He didn't play a ton last year, obviously with the medical issue he had. So they're going to put Okorafor on the left side, and they're probably going to go with either Onwenu or rookie Caden Wallace on the right side. Outside of that, you don't really know what you have. So you might need to keep Anderson and Lowe in the room. However, if they need to make a certain cut between those two, mine is Calvin Anderson. I just think with, Lowe's familiarity last year, and now granted it's a different system, so not in the system, but with the team he played, they saw what he was. He wasn't great by any means, but he was serviceable at times, and people are going to hate saying that because everyone has a vendetta out for Vidarian Lowe. And again, when he played left tackle, it wasn't great. When he played right tackle, it was okay. I think he can develop into that swing tackle more so than Calvin Anderson right now. Again, neither have played in Van Pelt's system, so it's different. You're going to have to get used to what Scott Peters wants to do, what Van Pelt wants to do, etc. But I think as far as comfortability in the with the team, Lowe makes more sense, and they might have to send Calvin Anderson packing again. if that's their decision, they're just going to keep one, load up because again, you load up the interior with, guys like we mentioned, Mafi and Leverett. Mike Onwenu, whether he's a tackle or whether he's a guard, he can do both. Sidney So started a tackle last year, has, been primarily a guard, but he can play some tackle if you have to as well. So like there's adjustments you can make. So I think at the end of the day, if they have to save room in the room, I think it's Calvin Anderson. So he's my surprise cut.
So I get that. And so I'm going based off really my roster projection just so I can have some consistency. I had Calvin Anderson and Vidarian Lowe making it, which I think that I had 9 total offensive linemen. I understand that might be a little bit much to have 2 backup tackles. But Calvin Anderson is an experienced guy. I really don't think he had a fair shake last year because he couldn't participate in the summer because of his health situation. Really was thrown into the fire while he was still sick. Did the best he could.
He started week 1, didn't he?
Yeah, he started week 1.
Yeah, that was an incredible. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I think they're going to want to give him a fair shake. I think he's a fine backup. Like, I don't think he's someone you want starting significantly, but I think the investment they made in him last season, I was thinking if he's your starting right tackle and that's the weak link, it's not the worst thing in the world, but obviously everything unraveled because of the injuries. And then Vidarian Lowe, I thought he actually played better on the left side than he did on the right, because that was his natural position. So I think maybe, again, with a better offensive line coach, you can work with him. He can take a step forward. But the guy that I have as a surprise cut is Antonio Mafi. I had him off of my roster projection. That's because I honestly thought the way he looked last season, he's more of a practice squad guy. And they also have depth on the interior already. Frankly, especially with Cole Strange, we have no idea what's going to happen, of course. But I think the depth on the inside is pretty solid. Like, you got Leighton Robinson waiting in the wings. Nick Leverett, again, is really solid. I just don't know how Antonio Mafi sees the field unless they just get ravaged by injury. I feel like, if anything, Leighton Robinson should be the guy who steps up for you if anything were to happen, or the guy that you really want in that position. And Mafi doesn't really fit their scheme. Now, to be fair, I'm not sure how well the entire offensive line fits in a wide zone scheme. I really don't. We're going to have to see. I think chemistry is going to be huge. Like Ramondre Stevenson even told us when he was explaining what the scheme was like, this isn't something you just roll out there. You got to work at it consistently. That may, help them overcome some hurdles, but Mafi's not going to be in that mix. At best, he's going to be with the twos. So if he's in there, then there's going to be a lack of continuity. And again, if anything, you want that continuity to be with Leighton Robinson. So I just don't understand how he makes the team. Hopefully he can take a step forward under Scott Peters, but I see him as more of a practice squad guy right now because I don't know who's going to poach him. Like, he didn't put a whole lot of good tape out there. That's a good point. And then I think the Pats took him in the 5th round last year. So, I don't think teams necessarily chomping at the bit to get him under their wing either. So, we all love Antonio Mafi. He's a really cool guy. He has talent, but I just think the way the roster shakes out, I think he's someone that can seek on the practice squad and continue to develop him. That's
a good point. It makes a ton of sense. It's a guy who you can – and again, everyone who you cut, you shouldn't expect to be back. Like, we talked about that a lot last year when they did the whole quarterback thing with Zappi and Cunningham. Like, if you cut this guy, you should expect them to get picked up. Just that's how you got to do roster business. But in both senses, one, if you lose him, maybe not that big of a deal. But 2, if you might expect him to come back around, and you can, like you said, put him on the practice squad and be just fine in that regard. So I as much as I think he's a sleeper, your reasoning makes a ton of sense, and I could easily see him being cut just as much as I can see him being their backup center.
100%. All right, finally, trade candidates. Who do you think is someone, and again, there's not a lot of depth at this dude in terms of like proven talent that would have value on the market. So this is a tough one, but who do you have as someone the Patriots could potentially move before the season?
Yeah, so we'll do the roster projection after this, and you mentioned kind of keeping consistency. And for full disclosure, like, I listed Anderson as a surprise cut and Vidarian Lowe as a trade candidate. I do have them both on my roster projection because I think ultimately they'll make the team, but it wouldn't shock me if Anderson was cut, and it wouldn't shock me if they traded Vidarian Lowe. Now, we already mentioned it. He wasn't great last year. He was called upon in a tough situation. Like, the Patriots situation was one of the worst in the NFL. Offensive line, but in general on offense. And so he was kind of thrown into the fire and didn't play well. But 2 years ago, he was with Minnesota and he didn't play that well, was drafted the year before, comes in, and then the Patriots traded a 6th-round pick for him. And he comes in here, doesn't play well again. It was sort of a desperation move for the Patriots at that point. They went through training camp, and within 2 days, within 2 days of roster cuts, they traded for Tyrone Wheatley Jr. and they traded for Vidarian Lowe. So it was, again, another desperation move. And I think if another team call it, at the end of August, early September, is kind of trying to do the same. They could dangle Vederian low and say, look, we'll take him, or, we'll give him to you for a 7th round pick, right? And you cut your losses that way and move forward, even if it's a future 7th round pick. So if they're, again, going to do that numbers game at the backup tackle position, they think we'll keep Calvin Anderson. Maybe we try and trade Vederian low for, some sort of low round pick or what have you. So again, nobody on the roster really screams trade candidate. So I think this is the one that might make the most sense when it comes towards the end of training camp.
Yeah, I agree with this one. I don't really have much else to add. Like Vederian Lowe, he's a younger guy. He does have physical talent.
Right.
And, NFL teams always think they can fix a guy. So if there's a team like the Patriots where you just get ravaged by injury and you really need someone to step in there, and at least someone where you're like, hey, all right, maybe we can just mold him to be better than what he's been in the past, I definitely think Vederian Lowe is that guy. And to his credit, I guess this feels like a backhanded compliment, but I remember when he got to the Patriots, I was watching his tape with the Vikings, and he let in a lot of interior pressure. He got beat inside a lot. And I asked him why that was, and he told me that with the Vikings, he was often taught to block outside in, which makes no sense to me. I don't even understand why you would do that. But then with the Patriots, most of his losses were to the outside. They were quick losses. They were ugly. Again, it kind of comes off like a backhanded compliment, but at least that was one part of his game where he wasn't letting things inside. You saw he could kind of be molded and improve some part of his game.
Right.
Marginally. All right. Roster projection. Who do you have in, who's out, and who do you have potentially being on some type of injury list going into the season?
Yeah. All right. So projection in, like I mentioned, Calvin Anderson, though I think he could be cut. I think he'll nix the team. I think they need to have that depth at tackle because you don't know what you have in Caden Wallace, and you really don't know what you have in Chukwueze for at left tackle. So keeping multiple tackles just in case you need to rotate some guys in and out makes sense to me. So Calvin Anderson makes it. David Andrews, obviously. Nick Leverett signed this offseason, makes the team. Vederian Lowe also makes it. Antonio Mafi, Chukwueze, Mike Onwenu, Layden Robinson, Sidy Sow, and Caden Wallace. I feel like none of those guys are a shock. Maybe Mafi, again, with what you said about the interior depth and things like that. But for now, I have Mafi on the team. And then out is recently signed Liam Fornadell, Zuri Henry, Michael Jordan, Charles Turner III, and Tyrone Wheatley Jr. And then IR, PUP, Jake Andrews from last season, who was drafted in the 4th round, didn't participate at all, I don't think, in the offseason program. So he's nursing something.
He was at the first day in OTAs.
Yeah, that might be. Yeah. But so he's clearly nursing something. I think that could be a move where you stash him for next season and beyond. And then Cole Strange might start on PUP as well because he, as we know, isn't going to be ready till, later on in the season. So I think that it's safe to assume that he'll start on IR. So that's kind of what I have.
Yeah. Mine's pretty similar. Again, I already mentioned Antonio Mafi's out, but the group that I have in, David Andrews, Mike Onwenu, Sidy Sow, Chukwueze, Nick Leverett, Calvin Anderson, and Vederian Lowe, as well as Caden Wallace and Layden Robinson, the rookies. Out, Antonio Mafi, already touched on that. Tyrone Wheatley Jr., who I do think can come back on the practice squad because he has experience in the Browns offense. They traded Pierre Strong over to Cleveland in exchange for Tyrone Wheatley Jr. Michael Jordan, he's someone who has a lot of talent, and he was someone that I think people were excited about when he was coming out of Ohio State. Also a really young guy when he came out, so he has experience in the league.
Right.
But also has kind of been more of a practice squad guy recently. Got kicked out of practice for getting into a fight, and then also was pulled out of the rotation during another practice for a false start. That hasn't really happened for anybody else. 2 infractions just is not a good look. Liam Fornadell, of course, I think he's more probably a practice squad guy. Charles Turner III, who I would say keep an eye out on, just because he has so much experience in the SEC with that LSU offense that didn't let up a lot of pressure. Feels like a David Andrews kind of situation where, yeah, sure, he goes undrafted, but he's someone who was in a really tough conference and managed to be part of a prolific offense. And then Zuri Henry, who we've barely even seen. That's not too crazy.
Yeah.
And then I have Cole Strange, probably on injured reserve, to be honest, because we heard he might not even be available until midseason.
Right.
I just don't, as depth, sure, but I just feel like his road to getting in the lineup is really uphill. Like I mentioned, chemistry is so huge. And then Jake Andrews, because like we said, we haven't really seen him. And since they have so much depth inside, I feel like this might be kind of redshirt year because he already played last season, but maybe like a second kind of redshirt year just because you don't really need his services quite yet. So yeah, that one's pretty straightforward. We're going to get to grades as well, but first, quick words from our friends at Game Time. Be right back.
Nothing says summer quite like a live baseball game. And whenever I want to check out a Red Sox game at Fenway, I'm using Game Time, the best place for last-minute deals on tickets. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace for Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. With Game Time, it's as easy as finding the game you want to attend, getting a view of the entire stadium to see what prices look like in different areas, and they actually do you a favor and show you both the cheapest tickets available and the best deals. You can also get the view from the seat that you pick, and between their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection, there's really no better option than Game Time. And with Game Time's lowest price guarantee, the app will actually credit you 110% of the difference if you find a cheaper ticket elsewhere. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
All right. Brace yourselves, everybody. We're doing grades for the offensive line group. Mike, what'd you give this unit?
I think I was feeling generous when I was writing this because I gave him a C-. I didn't want to give him a D. I didn't want to do that. And I think it's because there are a lot of what ifs. So I don't want to grade them for what I don't think it's going to be great. We'll put it that way. But they have to prove to me first that it's not going to be great, and they have an opportunity to do better. Like, you know, if what they see in Okorafor if what they see in Okorafor translates, they're going to be fine at the left side. If what they see in the combination of Caden Wallace and Mike Onwenu on the right side translates, they're going to be just fine. I just have a hard time thinking it's all going to work out. So for now, I'm going C-. They can obviously improve on that, and they can obviously end up as, a D or an F, which, going to be honest, I think that's probably more likely. But for now, I'm keeping it kind of in the middle towards the back, and I'm going with the C-.
I hate when we agree. It makes for bad content.
Yeah, right? Seriously.
I'm in the same
Not
place.
First take over here. We don't just yell at each other. We can't go back and forth too much.
Second take.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I don't think a D plus is even fair because Mike Onwenu, look at his contract. He's a good player.
Right. David Andrews is a good player. Like City So's a good player. Like there are some good guys on this roster, right?
Yeah, it's more unknowns and like really bad players. Like last year, right. I think even going into the season, it didn't look quite as bad if you were just hoping for health. Like I think if everybody was healthy, that group would have been a lot better than what it was. They got ravaged at the tackle spots, and then the fact that James Ferentz was really on the tail. He was done. He wasn't at the tail end of his career. It was pretty obvious he couldn't really play anymore. They didn't have any veteran depth inside, and that really hurt them. I don't think that's a problem this year. I think you've got guys who have shown they can start in the league. Chuso Okorafor, he's fine. If he's your only liability, having a liability at left tackle stinks, but it's not the worst thing in the world. You can still give him help, and he'll also get help from the scheme and the play calling. City So, another unknown, but he was the highest graded run blocking offensive lineman among the rookies last year. That's nothing to sniff at. Like that was very impressive. Pass pro needs to be more consistent, but he did show flashes where you're hoping, with good coaching and actually getting time at guard, whereas last summer he spent the entire time at tackle, which didn't make sense to anybody. You're hoping that combination helps him take a step forward. Like we said, David Andrews and Mike Onwenu, very good players. Want to clear something up also. I keep hearing that Mike Onwenu is like overpaid now because he's kicked in at guard. It's not true. It's just not true. Yeah. He is currently the third highest paid right guard after showing that he could be elite as a guard. If you look at his PFF grades from 2022, he's top 3 or 5 in offensive grade, run blocking grade, and pass blocking grade.
Right.
And he's the 4th highest paid right tackle. So we've got to stop.
And if he's a guy that can do both pretty well, you've mentioned it a bunch. He's virtually an all-pro guard. And he's a really good tackle. So like that's worth, even if you think it's an overpay, that's worth the overpay. So I don't really understand that. Like I think if he's a guy who you can swing at both positions and things are pretty flawless at both, you're fine. So I don't think. I'm with you. I think it's kind of crazy when people are trying to say that.
If anything, you get better value if you get a Pro Bowl caliber player who's the 3rd highest paid in his position. Like, yeah, that's the point. The market also resets every year. Like, as long as it's a good player, it doesn't really matter what you pay them because 2 years down the line, it's going to look like a steal because they're going to go from 3rd to probably like around 5th, 8th, or something like that. So I had to get that off my chest. I think that's ridiculous. And then Caden Wallace. He's someone who took a big jump his last year at Penn State, a ton of experience. You can see it in the patience that he plays with. And also, technically, he's a pretty advanced player. There's things he's got to work on. I asked him about independent hand usage because he kind of has the tendency, like Cole Strange, where they tend to shoot with both their hands, which if a defender swats that down, we saw this a lot last season with the tackles, you're screwed because you're completely off balance. Right. And he doesn't get beat like cleanly very often. I think he allowed 1 sack and like 2 hits last year. So he was good in pass protection, even if his grades weren't great. And you're hoping, again, with quality coaching, especially at right tackle, you get more help than you do over on the left side. Maybe he can be at least a solid starter for you and you have a strong interior. So I don't think it's fair to give this group a D, again, because I think that's a very pessimistic view. Yeah. And I think it's fair to have some optimism because the coaching is better than it's been, again, in several years. And you have guys with starting experience in the NFL who are also projected to be starters. And Caden Wallace, you could say he was a reach in the third, but nobody was saying that he wasn't a starting caliber player. Right. It was that if he gets good coaching, he'd probably start right away or at least be a role player for you. And it also takes some of the edge off that he's going to be on the right side rather than having to be on the left where it is a very different skill set.
Yeah. And they also, too, speaking of reaching for Wallace, and we've dove into this a million times, but that's how, like, and I can't remember exactly the names off the top of my head right now, but that's just how the board fell. They needed a tackle. Guys went before him, and you had to take them where you had to take them. They probably, if they took him in the next round, it wouldn't have been a reach, but that's just how the board fell and they had to do it. So,
and it was also, last thing I'll say, it was just not a good offseason to need tackles if like the Patriots in the draft who didn't prioritize or couldn't prioritize it in the top 2 rounds, because in free agency, we knew there weren't a lot of realistic options. Tyron Smith was never going to come here. He said he wanted to go to a contender. Like it or not, that's what the Jets are. And then I think the only guy that I really was pushing for was Jonah Williams. He's playing right tackle for the Cardinals. So I don't even know if that would have been a good fit. And then, like you mentioned, in the draft, the way it fell, the only players I think would have come in here and I think really been good fits, considering they clearly value experience. Because with so little practice time, it's been clear the Patriots are saying, hey, we want guys who we teach them how to do things differently. We don't want to have to build you from the ground up necessarily. Yeah. That's what it looks like to me, at least. And I think with Kingsley Suamataia, I loved him. Super inexperienced. There was almost no chance he was going to play at all this season. And then Patrick Paul was the only other guy, but he was the one who really started that run on tackles where I'm sure the Patriots tried to move up at some point to maybe get him. I think they tried to get Tyler Guyton. That was the report was. They tried to trade up for him. And they couldn't, and Caden Wallace still a good player. So I'll end on that. Anything else before we wrap this one up?
No, I think that's it. We'll be back next Monday on the website with safeties, and then we'll obviously be back here on Patriots Press Pass at some point, breaking down the article and getting your thoughts as well. So
awesome. That's going to be an interesting group to find a surprise cut for.
I know.
Oregon Canada, but we'll see. It's a fun exercise just to think about because anything can happen in the NFL. Exactly. So we're going to wrap it up for this week. Look forward to that safety episode next week. But until then, take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We'll see you next time. Peace, y'all.